And thanks for being with us on this Monday evening, February 13th, as we recap what happened in the courtroom today in the Alex Murdaugh double murder trial. The former disgraced attorney now accused of shooting and killing his wife Maggie and son Paul in June of 2021. After we go over today's testimony, there was a lot of it. We're going to be joined by two criminal defense attorneys for their take on the latest developments in this trial today. The trial resumed today with two jurors being released after they tested positive for COVID. They've been replaced by two alternate jurors. Judge Newman decided against a request to delay the trial for a few days to prevent more jurors from getting sick, however, encouraging those in the courtroom to wear masks. Now, before testimony started this morning, prosecutors told the court they have received new information they want to introduce. Attorney Creighton Waters says that after court adjourned on Friday, General Motors contacted prosecutors saying they have found additional data from Murdaugh's Chevy Suburban. That's the vehicle that Murdaugh was driving on the night of the murders. Prosecutors say the new data includes GPS information that they plan to use when presenting a timeline for their case. Meanwhile, defense attorneys are asking for enough time now to study the data before cross-examining new witnesses.
The only hang-up that once they authenticate it, before we cross-examine their expert, we need an opportunity to have our experts advise us what, if anything, we need to ask them. I mean, that's just, how it works.
We have specific location data points that are being logged every 30 seconds or so or something like that, as well as vehicle speed. That's the crucial data that's in this from the relevant time period. There's another file that has some various sensor data that's logged, but in our initial review, I don't think there's going to be anything in that information that's going to be helpful to either side.
Judge Newman said that he would address any issues as they appear. Well, DNA and blood analysis made up a large part of today's testimony. SLED DNA expert Sarah Zapata on the stand for more than 2 hours today. Her testimony was very detailed here, including massive numbers when comparing the odds of her results. She said the swabs of blood found on the steering wheel of that Chevy included both Alex Murdaugh and Maggie Murdaugh's DNA. The same was said for DNA taken in cuttings from Murdaugh's shirt the night of the murders.
So let's start with the shirt in Exhibit 460, item 19.2, a cutting from the exterior front edge of Alex Murdaugh's shirt, the defendant.
For the comparison to Margaret Murdaugh, the DNA profile is approximately 360 quadrillion times more likely if Richard Alexander Murdaugh and Margaret Murdaugh contributed to the mixture than if Richard Alexander Murdaugh and an unidentified, unrelated individual contributed to the mixture.
Zapata also faced lengthy questioning from the defense.
In your test, on none of these did you detect human blood with hematrips. Is that correct?
For all of those cuttings for the different items, they were all put together into that tube for that item, and for all of those tests, the result was negative.
The final witness of the day was a pathologist with MUSC. She conducted the autopsies on Paul and Maggie Murdaugh. She used a diagram to show jurors where the victims were shot. They were also shown graphic photographs of the victims. She testified that Paul Murdaugh was shot twice with a shotgun. The first shot hit Paul in the chest, but was not the fatal shot.
No, amazingly enough, this really, if that was all he sustained, he would have needed medical attention and some stitches and irrigation of the wound to clean it out, make sure he doesn't get infected. But it actually did not pierce the chest or cause any internal bleeding. It did, however, cause a bruise or contusion of the left lung, and that's because there's a lot of energy associated with this, but didn't actually go through the ribs, but caused a contusion of the left lung. But he would have been expected to continue to be standing after this. It would not have sent him to the ground.
Well, that doctor added that the second shot caused a fatal head wound for Paul Murdaugh. We also learned that Maggie Murdaugh was shot several times.
So she sustained a total of 5 gunshot wounds.
from a minimum of 4 shots. So it could have been from 4 shots with 5 wounds or 5 separate shots. The gunshot wound to the abdomen was slightly further away than the gunshot wound to the left thigh.
And that could be consistent with Maggie and the shooter changing their positions in relationship to one another.
Yeah, people aren't completely just standing still. It could be that the shooter was moving closer toward her or moving a little bit back, or she could have been moving, or a combination of the two.
We also learned in court today no defensive wounds were found on either of the victims. The autopsy showed they had recently eaten a meal together. No drugs, no alcohol were found in their systems other than caffeine. All right, we're going to be joined now by our 2 legal experts for their take on today's development. We have Luke and we have Brian Sheely. Guys, thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you.
Lots of testimony today. Before we dive into it, let me talk about the significance of 2 jurors with COVID and what this means for the trial, if any. 2 alternates taking their place.
Right. Well, they're dwindling. You got to have enough alternates. I think we started with 6, which is an abundance of caution type thing. We were down 1 last week due to some other reasons. We're down 2 today. And it was fascinating to see both the defense and the state kind of want a pause, maybe wait until Wednesday to kind of test again for COVID. But Judge Newman wasn't having that. He's the type of judge, based on our experience, who likes to keep the trial train moving, a tight schedule. And so you get in a situation right now where we've got 3 alternates, and if there was some type of COVID spread, we could be forced to really dwindle in numbers, and it might be bad news for the trial if it gets that route. Fingers crossed it doesn't.
Your take, Brian?
Yeah, we had a juror get released in our last trial with Judge Newman in December, kind of later on in the trial, very much like this, and Judge Newman is very much wants to utilize all alternates. That case was much shorter, but yeah, we are down to 3. And if an outbreak happens or we just run out of alternates and we start losing our jury, then we may be forced to think about the next step, which is a mistrial, which nobody wants.
There was a request, I think, to basically put a pause on the trial for a few days while they waited to see if this was going to be a bigger problem.
Yeah, and I think initially Creighton Waters and Dick Harpootlian were both in agreement. I think before they actually realized that Judge Newman had released the 2 jurors, they were saying, well, let's kind of keep them in fold, let's monitor them, let's take a pause and make sure we don't lose too many other alternates or even jurors themselves. And Judge Newman says, no, we're going to proceed, we're not going to delay, and we'll deal with what we deal with. So interesting to follow.
I know we've been talking about a lot of circumstantial evidence in this trial, but a lot of DNA and a lot of blood evidence was introduced today by SLED and their expert on the stand today. How big of a deal is this going to play into the trial? I mean, can they for sure say that this blood, this DNA evidence, this came from the night of the murders?
Well, it's really fascinating. You heard from a serology expert, you heard from the DNA expert herself. And of course, the big takeaways were that the shirt that Mr. Murdaugh was wearing, the white shirt, has no human blood on it whatsoever. So score 1 point for the defense bucket. But you had lots of various points of DNA of both his wife and his son, but were explained by what we call touch DNA, when you touch something and leave skin cells. So now you had some DNA for the state. Of course, Maggie's DNA through blood on his steering wheel, as well as his own DNA, which of course the defense wants to explain as he's checking on, his wife, and then he's getting in his car and driving up and, getting a shotgun and things of that nature. So they both scored some points. Big takeaway for the defense is no DNA in that famous blue raincoat belonging to Mr. Murdaugh. So as much as they really wanted to tie that to the scene, it doesn't really appear that he touched it, at least that the science can discern. So that was fascinating.
A lot has been said about that Chevy Suburban and whatever movements they can track Murdaugh with that night. Today, this development that General Motors says, oh, wait a minute, we might have some additional information. I know, Brian, you've got some thoughts on that, don't you?
I do, JR. We had the FBI analyst that kind of cracked the Chevy's computer, which gave us a lot of data on when it's in park, when it's not in park, that kind of data, and we could kind of base it to help with the timeline. And FBI was basically saying GM did not give us any information on the OnStar data. We're talking about the GPS tracking data. And apparently GM was listening, because first thing this morning, Creighton Waters said, hey, Judge Newman, we got an issue to take up here. We got a call from GM. They're turning over this information immediately. We've sent it right over to the defense team. And I think that was surprising to everybody. And the defense team wants their expert to look at it. That was made clear.
Right.
Creighton Waters is kind of to fast track that. It's all stuff that's, he's a very savvy, experienced prosecutor. It's all stuff that tracks with and corroborates our initial testimony. But of course, the defense team wants to look at it. This could be critical. I mean, GPS data is a lot more specific than in park, not in park. And the cell phone information we have with the triangulation is more broader. So this could be very specific. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but certainly it seems like the state is going to dive into it, authenticate it through a GM representative, and then kind of dive into the data and what it means. And the defense is going to have to be prepared for that. And I imagine they're burning the midnight oil looking at that information.
Well, the state obviously thinks it's big enough to want to make it a late ad, even if it means extending their case another day or so, right, Luke?
Yeah, I think Brian's right. It's going to be some pretty specific OnStar GPS tracking data that they hope really corroborates their timeline, just solidifies it in stone, so that there's very little wiggle room for Mr. Murdaugh. So it's probably what they want to do, and it's worth it to them. And of course, the defense is going to hold their hands up and say, well, we need a chance to look at this, and they'll get their chance. Just won't be much.
Right. Late today, the pathologist from MUSC on the stand with some pretty graphic details. I know some of our staff members in the newsroom were listening to that testimony as it was coming down, and it made them sick to their stomach just to hear some of the things that were being said on the witness stand. Has to be tough for a jury in there right now listening to how Paul Murdaugh died. First shot, not the fatal blow, but the second shot, the fatal blow to the head. But again, I am not going into the graphic detail here that was given on the witness stand today. It got pretty graphic, right?
Yeah, JR, it really did. And at this point in a trial, when the pathologist ultimately comes in, it's always emotional. I mean, it's technical, it's highly technical. The state and defense can really extrapolate a lot from it. But it has this emotional element too. Autopsy photographs are revealed. Not all of them. I mean, that's kind of a pretrial matter, but they're going to be graphic. I think the takes from today concerning the pathologist's analysis of Paul was that we had 2 shots and one was fatal. His arms were down when he was shot. She was able to determine that based on the shotgun shells and the positioning of his arm. It was pretty clear, so his hands were not up, and there were also no defensive wounds, meaning he wasn't trying to deflect or repel an attacker. Often when you're engaged in a struggle that is coming, you're trying to deflect and protect yourself, so none of that defensive wounds, which seemed to indicate he was shot while very much surprised.
That was my next statement I was going to make. Obviously, this points to him being very surprised or taken aback by whoever fired the shots at him. There's been some talk by Alex Murdaugh, this might have been payback for the boating accident with Paul Murdaugh. But the testimony today clearly shows that Murdaugh was maybe surprised, very taken aback by what was happening in that dog kennel area.
Very much so. I think if I'm the defense team, I'm saying he was surprised. It wasn't someone that he was familiar with. He didn't even know about it before it happened. There were no defensive wounds. And also the stippling, which was present off of the gunshots from the shotgun. You have to be within 3 feet to have that gunshot residue on his person. And so that shows it was a very close encounter, no defensive wounds, and he was most likely surprised.
Shot with a shotgun, Luke, and I believe Maggie Murdaugh shot with a rifle, shot at least 5 times from the testimony we heard today.
Right. I found that very interesting. It was the first time we really learned about the mechanism of her injury. And we know from prior testimony that there were 6 blackout shell casings found around her. And so we heard the pathologist say that we had 5 entry wounds. She also said the wrist wound could have been a through and through. maybe for 4 entry wounds. The thing that I found most fascinating was they all essentially came the way she demonstrated from the front, but for this one, and I'm not trying to get too graphic, but you've got a shot to the abdomen, a shot to the thigh, a shot to the wrist, a shot to the base of the neck, and a shot that kind of comes at a very angled measure through the breast and then up the collarbone and again re-enters the neck, which was fatal. And so they really did try to get the pathologist to say which was first and which was second. And that was the only problem that left me with some questions, because she really wanted to identify the abdomen shot as what would cause her to double over, the abdomen, then the thigh. And then if you double over, she tried to explain she might take a shot that would explain the base of the neck because she's like in that position. But the abdomen and the thigh have stippling, so we know that those shots came at a close range, less than 3 feet. The others did not. So when you have an assailant, in my view of a crime scene, they're closing the gap, they're approaching their victim, they're not going to then back away. So it doesn't make sense to me that you'd have those shots first. Those would be the last shots because someone's getting closer and providing stippling at the very end. So I don't know exactly how it panned out, but you had 2 shots that were fatal, the rest were not, and very interesting stippling kind of analysis on it.
And again, no defensive wounds on Maggie.
Right.
Some very disturbing testimony from the pathologist, so much so that Judge Newman took a break. He let the people in the courtroom basically gather their thoughts, I suppose, for a few moments, maybe just stand, maybe just kind of accept what they just heard from the witness stand. And at several times, Alex Murdaugh seemed to be shedding tears. He seemed to be visibly upset by what he was hearing in court today.
Gunshot wounds.
Right. I mean, we've seen him get upset throughout the trial. I would say this is the most we've seen him get upset. And it can cut both ways. If you're the defense, you say he's innocent, he's hearing the graphic nature of his loved one's death. It's causing just this intense, just visceral reaction of grief. And if you're the state, you can say, look, he can grieve and regret something bad he did. It doesn't mean he won't shed a tear over it, but we still think he did it. So but it was undeniable, real emotional imagery that probably impacted the jury.
And JR, in terms of the break as well, and in our past trials with Judge Newman, often during the pathologist's testimony, he will offer a break, because not only is it emotional for people in the courtroom, but the jurors themselves are looking at this evidence, and they haven't seen evidence like this in the trial before. And for seasoned trial lawyers and experts that see this all the time, it may not have the same reaction, but to your average juror, it's very difficult to view. And so for them to do their job and focus, I think part of what Judge Newman does, and rightly so, is gives them a break so that they can recollect their thoughts and be paying attention to what the pathologist is saying.
As your brother Luke mentioned, though, the jury very aware that Alex Murdaugh is sitting there trembling and in tears as he's hearing this testimony, as he is seeing some of these graphics, as he is listening to all of this unfold in court today.
Yeah, I mean, they are nonstop judging him from their jury box. And if he's being emotional at appropriate times, if he's upset. I even caught him today. They were excusing the jury for that break, and as they were getting up to leave, he almost got more emotional. If I were a juror looking at that, I'd be thinking, well, we're leaving. Why is he holding it together until we leave? And that would almost seem more natural. So it's interesting. It's the human dynamic. They're judging him. They're trying to figure out, is he being honest with us or not? Is it a show? Mm-hmm. And it seemed pretty real emotion to, at least from my perspective today.
We're in the home stretch here because the state says they want to rest on Wednesday, at least by Wednesday. So how does this extra evidence from General Motors coming in, how is that going to play with the Wednesday timeline?
I don't think it'll push it back too much. I think they can still get it done. It's going to be pretty precise. And then we got to have probably Cousin Eddie, who's going to be fireworks regarding what he says about the roadside suicide, if you will. We're going to have some lead investigator to tie it all up. And that might be a wrap. And then the defense is going to do what the defense does, and we'll all be anxiously waiting to see what that will be.
So perhaps tomorrow we might hear from Cousin Eddie and someone to put a bow on it before we hear the General Motors evidence or data on Wednesday?
I would guess that we're going to hear the GM data first, and then we'll hear Cousin Eddie, and then the lead investigator at the end. I know that the attorney for Cousin Eddie, Mr. Smith, has been in Walterboro. I've seen her interviewed on some news networks. I know she's down there, and maybe the GM data has kind of delayed his testimony because they want to get through the technical data before they get their last major lay witness who's got a story to tell, and then they'll tie it up with the last investigator, the lead investigator.
It is fascinating to watch it all unfold as we enter week 4. This is actually week 4 of the trial. Today begins week 4, and we can go all the way back to jury selection as well. So yeah, a lot of things unfolding in court as the days progress, and of course we are there for you with live team coverage you can watch anytime on WLTX Plus, our YouTube channel, and on WLTX.com. Testimony resuming at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Brian and Luke Shealy, guys, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
And we hope you have a good night.